The church windows rattled, not from the wind, but from the fury of Catherine Nash's father. His fist hit the old pew like a gavel of doom, and his voice cracked through the holy silence. "You will marry Vernon Hollister. By the end of the month, that is final." The words weren't a discussion, they were a sentence. And with them, Catherine's world shrank to the size of a grave. In the dry, unforgiving summer of 1879, another Montana dream was turning to dust. Her amber eyes, usually so full of fire, went dim. She was 22, but in that moment, she felt ancient. For 5 years, ever since her mother was buried on the hill behind their ranch, Catherine had been the woman of the house. She cooked, she cleaned, she nursed her father through his whiskey-soaked sorrows and raised her younger brother. She gave everything, and her reward was this: to be sold off like a prize heifer to the richest and meanest man in the territory. "Father, please," she whispered, her voice getting lost in the cavernous church. "Mr. Hollister, he's buried 2 wives already." Her father's face was stone, and both died, leaving him richer than before. "Our ranch is failing, Catherine. The drought has wiped us out. This marriage is the only thing keeping us from losing the very land your grandfather bled for." Duty was a heavy cloak, and it was suffocating her. Her father wasn't always this man. Before the debt, before the bottle, he had been proud, he had been kind. Now he was a stranger with her father's face, bartering her future for his survival. "Vernon has offered to clear it all," he said, his voice dropping a little. A pathetic attempt at softness. "He'll send your brother to a real school back east. It's the only way, girl." As they stepped out of the church, the Montana sun was a physical blow, and across the street, leaning against a carriage so polished it shamed the dusty town, was Vernon Hollister himself. He was a predator in a tailored suit, his silver-streaked hair slicked back, his eyes scanning the townspeople like a hawk surveying mice. He saw her. A slow, thin smile spread across his lips. It wasn't a smile of warmth. It was a smile of ownership. "There's my beautiful bride," he called out, his voice gliding across the street. The townsfolk scattered, parting for him as if he were a king or a plague. He strode toward her, a small velvet box in his hand. "I've brought you something." Her father nudged her, a silent command. "Accept." She opened it. Inside, a diamond glittered with cold fire. It was a stone so large, so perfect, it was obscene. It was worth more than their ranch, more than their lives. "I expect you to wear it." "Always," Vernon said. He didn't wait for her to respond. He plucked the ring from the box and forced it onto her finger. His grip was like iron, a painful, crushing pressure on her knuckles. His voice was smooth as silk, but his eyes delivered a different message, a warning. "My seamstress will be by tomorrow," he said, still holding her hand too tight, "to measure you for the gown." That night, Catherine sat on the porch, the hateful diamond on her finger feeling less like a jewel and more like a manacle. The sunset bled across the mountains, but she felt no peace. All she could think about were the rumors, whispers about Vernon Hollister's dead wives. Whispers of doors locked from the outside, of long illnesses that had no name, of bruises explained away as clumsy accidents. "You deserve better than this." The voice came from the shadows, deep and quiet. Catherine jumped, her hand flying to the small whittling knife she always kept in her apron pocket. Blake Keller stepped out from the side of the porch, holding his worn hat in his hands. For 3 years, Blake had worked their land. He was quiet, steady, and strong. He was everything Vernon Hollister was not. Honest. "Mr. Keller," she said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You startled me." "Forgive me, Miss Nash," he said. The last rays of sun caught in his sandy hair. "I came to give my notice. I'll be leaving at the end of the week." A strange, sharp sense of loss hit her. Blake was a constant, a buffer against her father's worst moods. He was a silent protector she hadn't realized she'd come to rely on. "Why?" she asked, though she was afraid she already knew. His blue eyes met hers, and they were filled with a truth he didn't need to speak. "I can't stand by and watch this happen." The silence that fell between them was heavy with everything they couldn't say. "There's nothing to be done," Catherine said finally, looking away toward the darkening hills. "My father has made his decision. I have to think of my family." "Hollister is not what he seems," Blake said, his voice low and urgent. "They still talk about his first wife in Cheyenne, about the fall." She took down a flight of stairs. "In Denver, they say the second one just wasted away, locked in her room until she died of a nervous condition." Catherine shivered. The warm evening air had suddenly turned ice cold. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," he started, then stopped himself, clenching his jaw. "Because no one deserves what's waiting for you in that man's house." He turned and walked away into the darkness, leaving Catherine alone with the chilling echo of his words and the cold weight of the diamond on her hand. But there was something else. As she stared at the ring, she noticed for the first time an intricate carving on the inside of the band. It was a tiny, stylized rose. The next day, Vernon's seamstress arrived, a mousy woman who wouldn't meet Catherine's eye. While she was being measured and prodded like livestock, her maid, Rose, came in to help. Rose had been with Catherine since they were girls, a friend as much as a servant. Rose's eyes fell upon the ring, and she froze. All the color drained from her face. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. "Rose, what is it?" Catherine asked. Rose just stared at the ring, her dark eyes wide with terror. She grabbed Catherine's hand, turning it over to look at the tiny, carved rose on the inside. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Mr. Hollister gave it to me. It's my engagement ring." Rose shook her head, backing away slowly. "No," she breathed. "That's not possible. That was Martha's ring." "Martha?" Catherine asked, confused. "Martha Hollister," Rose said, her voice cracking. "His first wife. She showed it to me once, when they passed through town years ago. She said her grandfather had it made for her grandmother. That rose, it was their family symbol." The room suddenly felt airless. The diamond wasn't just a ring, it was a trophy, a hand-me-down from a dead woman. Vernon hadn't even bothered to buy her a new one. He had simply recycled the one from the wife who had fallen down the stairs. The wedding preparations became a waking nightmare. Vernon visited every day, showering her with gifts that felt like bribes, all while chipping away at her with small, cruel criticisms. Her posture wasn't right. Her laugh was too loud. She needed to learn to be a more fitting hostess. "You'll have to let that maid of yours go," he said one afternoon, as if discussing the weather. "Rose, I have already selected a more appropriate staff for our home, women who understand my standards." "Rose is my friend," Catherine protested, her voice rising. Vernon's smile was a razor blade. "My dear, when you are Mrs. Hollister, you will learn to leave childish attachments behind. I will not have my wife attended by a half-breed Cherokee girl." The words struck Catherine like a physical blow. Each day she felt herself shrinking, disappearing under the weight of his judgment and her father's hollow-eyed acceptance. Blake was gone, and his absence was a raw, aching void. He was the only person who had ever made her feel seen. Now she was truly alone. 3 days before the wedding, she was summoned to Vernon's mansion for dinner. Her father, sober for once, insisted she go by herself. "Remember what's at stake," he'd warned, his eyes pleading. "Don't do anything to anger him." The house was a monument to arrogance, a huge Gothic monstrosity that loomed over the simple town below. Inside, it was a museum of cold, untouchable luxury, crystal, velvet, and polished wood that had never seen a day of honest work. "Your new home," Vernon announced, watching her with an unnerving intensity. "Do you like it?" "It's very grand," she managed to say. "Come," he said, his fingers digging into her elbow. "Let me show you the gallery." It was a long hallway lined with portraits. All of them were women, and they all looked unnervingly like Catherine. Same dark blonde hair, same amber eyes. "My ancestors," Vernon said, but his voice was flat, rehearsed. "The Hollister women have always been prized for their beauty and their obedience." Catherine felt a cold dread creeping up her spine. These weren't his ancestors. She looked closer at the newest portrait, at the bottom of the row. The woman wore a dress from only a few years prior. The artist had signed and dated it. This was his second wife, the one who had died of a nervous condition. And the portrait next to it, that must be Martha. He was collecting them, like butterflies pinned to a board. The tour grew more disturbing. He showed her the bedroom she would use. "Separate from mine, of course," he said with that cold smile. "Until you've proven yourself compliant." He pointed out the heavy locks on the windows. "For your protection, my dear." He introduced her to the housekeeper, a woman with a face like a locked vault, who would be, in his words, guiding her transition. By dinner, Catherine could barely breathe. Vernon talked and talked, a monologue about his power, his money, his influence. When he noticed she hadn't touched her food, his eyes narrowed. "I expect gratitude," he said softly, the words more threatening than any shout. "I have saved your family from utter ruin. A little enthusiasm is the least you can offer." She forced herself to take a bite of the rich food. It tasted like ash. As the evening wore on, the mask slipped further. He laid out the rules. She would not leave the house without his permission. She would not receive visitors unless he approved them. Her sole purpose, he made chillingly clear, was to give him a son. "My previous wives were disappointing in that regard," he said, sipping his wine. "I trust you will not make the same mistake." The ride home was silent. When the carriage stopped, he grabbed her wrist, his wine-sour breath hot against her ear. "3 more days," he hissed, "and then you belong to me. In every way, reconcile yourself to it." The bruises from his grip were already forming as she stumbled out of the carriage. That night's sleep was impossible. Her mind was a whirlwind of desperate, useless escape plans. She was trapped. For her family, she would have to walk into that house and let him pin her to his collection. The next morning, the day before the wedding, she went into town for a few last-minute items. It was an excuse. She just needed a few moments of air, of freedom, before the cage door slammed shut. "Miss Nash." The voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise of the street. She turned. It was Blake Keller. He looked like he'd ridden all night, his clothes covered in dust, his face grim. "Mr. Keller," she breathed, her heart leaping into her throat. "I thought you'd left." "I did," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then I came back." Before she could ask why, Vernon's carriage rounded the corner at the far end of the street. Panic seized her. "He can't see me talking to you," she said, her voice rushed. Blake didn't flinch. He just gave a single sharp nod. "The old Peterson claim. Midnight. Please, Catherine." It was the first time he'd ever used her name. Catherine. It sounded so different coming from him. As Vernon's carriage rolled closer, she forced a brittle smile onto her face, the sound of her own name, spoken by Blake, echoing in her mind. That night she waited until the house was silent. She crept out, saddled her mare, and rode for the abandoned Peterson homestead. The moon was a silver sliver, and the trail was treacherous, but she didn't care. Fear was a powerful horseman, driving her onward. The cabin looked dark and deserted, but as she swung down from her horse, the door creaked open. Blake stood there, a lantern in his hand casting a warm, golden glow. "You came," he said, and the relief in his voice was so thick she could feel it. "I shouldn't have," she whispered, but she followed him inside. The cabin was small and clean. A fire crackled in the hearth, and she was not alone with Blake. Rose was there, her face pale and determined, and next to her was Doc Wallace, the town's physician, his medical bag sitting on the rough-hewn table. "What is this?" Catherine asked, her eyes darting between them. Blake gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Catherine. There's a lot you need to know." He started talking, and the story that unfolded was 100 times more terrifying than the rumors. Doc Wallace spoke of injuries that were no accidents, broken bones, contusions shaped like a fist. He spoke of being called to the Hollister mansion in the middle of the night, only to be turned away at the door by Vernon himself. Rose then told them about her cousin, a girl who had worked as a maid for Vernon's second wife, Eleanor. Her cousin had witnessed Vernon's rages, had seen him drag Eleanor by her hair into the soundproofed room Catherine had been shown. And then, one day, Rose's cousin had simply vanished. No one ever saw her again. "The territorial marshal knows," Blake explained, his voice tight with anger. "He's been trying to build a case for years, but Hollister has judges and politicians in his pocket. Witnesses disappear, evidence gets lost." "Why are you telling me this now?" Catherine asked, her hands trembling. "The wedding is tomorrow." "Because I'm not asking you to postpone the wedding," Blake said, his blue eyes boring into hers. "I'm asking you to leave with me. Tonight." "Leave?" The idea was insane, impossible. "Where would we go? My father, my brother." "Your father sold you to a monster," Blake said, the words blunt but not unkind. "Doc Wallace is going to talk to him after we're gone. He'll make him understand what kind of man he made a deal with." He took a deep breath. "As for where, I have family in Colorado, a small ranch. It's not a mansion, Catherine. It's just honest work and a safe life." "You're asking me to run away with you," she said, the reality of it hitting her. "A man I barely know." It was Rose who stepped forward. "Miss Catherine, you've known Mr. Keller for 3 years. You've seen the man he is every single day. Can you say the same for Vernon Hollister?" She couldn't. She looked at Blake, at the earnest, worried lines on his face. This quiet ranch hand was risking everything for her. "There's something else," Blake said, his voice softer now. He looked down at his hands, then back up at her. "My name isn't Blake Keller." Catherine stared at him, confused. "My name is Blake Richardson," he said. "Eleanor, Vernon's second wife. She was my sister." The confession hung in the air, a shocking, impossible truth. He wasn't just a concerned ranch hand. He was here for vengeance. He'd been working on her father's ranch for 3 years, living under a false name, watching, waiting for a chance to get close to the man who killed his sister. He'd come to Willow Creek to find justice, but instead, he'd found Catherine walking into the very same trap. He pulled a small, worn, leather-bound book from his coat pocket. This was her diary. I got it from the maid, Rose's cousin, before she disappeared. Most of it is just daily life, but the last few pages... He opened it. The handwriting was elegant, but shaky. Catherine read the words Eleanor had written in the last days of her life. "He says the locks are for my protection, but I feel like a prisoner. He calls it love, but his eyes are so cold. I'm so afraid. He has a room in the cellar. I hear things at night." The last entry was just 2 words. "He knows." He knows she was writing things down, Blake said, his voice thick with grief and rage. I think that's why he killed her, and I think he killed that maid to cover it up. He looked directly at Catherine, his purpose laid bare. I can't let him do it again, Catherine. I won't. The choice was no longer about duty or family honor. It was about survival. If I go with you, she said, her voice barely a whisper, he will hunt us. He will never stop. A hard, dangerous look entered Blake's eyes, a look she had never seen before. Let him try. They rode all night, pushing the horses hard, not stopping until the sun rose over the mountains and the town of Willow Creek was 20 miles behind them. They arrived in Cedar Ridge, a town where Vernon Hollister's name didn't carry the same weight of fear, and went straight to the marshal's office. Marshal James Thornton was a hard man with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. He listened to their story without interruption, his expression growing grimmer with every word. He looked at the diary. He listened to Doc Wallace's medical testimony and Rose's story about her missing cousin. When they were finished, he leaned back in his chair. I've heard whispers about Hollister for years. This diary, your testimony, it might be enough to finally get a warrant from the territorial judge. The new one isn't on Hollister's payroll. He looked at Catherine, his gaze softening slightly. You did the right thing, Miss Nash. But you need to understand, this is going to get ugly. Hollister won't take this lying down. He then turned to Blake. I suggest you two make yourselves scarce. Go to that family of yours in Colorado and lay low until we have him in custody. Relief washed over Catherine, so potent it almost made her knees buckle. They were safe. They had the law on their side. But that feeling didn't last. That afternoon, as they were preparing to buy supplies for the journey, Vernon Hollister stormed into Cedar Ridge. He wasn't alone. He had 3 hired guns with him, hard-faced men with pistols strapped to their hips. He burst into the marshal's office, his face purple with rage. Thornton, that woman is my property. She signed a marriage contract. And that man, he snarled, pointing a shaking finger at Blake, is a thief who has stolen what belongs to me. Marshal Thornton stood up slowly, his hand resting near his gun. She doesn't belong to anyone, Hollister, and she's given me a sworn statement about your threats, about your other wives. Vernon laughed, a chilling, ugly sound. Her word against mine? Don't be a fool, Thornton. I have friends in Helena. Very powerful friends. They will make this whole unfortunate business disappear, and they will make sure you disappear with it. He then locked his eyes on Catherine. You will regret this, he hissed. You will beg me for a quick death before I am done with you. He and his men stormed out, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. He can do it, can't he? Catherine whispered. He can make this go away. Marshal Thornton's face was grim. His influence reaches farther than I thought. The charges might not stick. His friends might bury it. He looked at the door. You need to leave, now. Go out the back way. I'll try to hold them here as long as I can. They didn't need to be told twice. They slipped out the back alley, their hearts pounding. But as they rounded the corner, one of Vernon's gunmen was waiting for them. Going somewhere, the man sneered, drawing his pistol. Blake moved faster than Catherine had ever seen a man move. He shoved her behind him, and in one fluid motion, drew a small, concealed pistol from inside his boot. He fired once. The gunman crumpled to the ground, clutching a bloody shoulder. It was only then that Catherine realized. Blake wasn't just a grieving brother. The way he moved, the way he handled the gun, he was no simple ranch hand. Who are you? She breathed as he grabbed her hand and pulled her into a run. No time, he yelled. We have to get to the horses. They raced to the livery stable, the sounds of shouting behind them growing closer. As they frantically saddled their horses, another of Vernon's men appeared in the doorway, leveling a rifle. Blake threw himself at Catherine, knocking them both into the hay as a shot splintered the wood where her head had been. Blake fired back from the ground, and the man in the doorway fell. They scrambled onto their horses and galloped out of the stable, out of Cedar Ridge, with the sounds of Vernon's rage-filled shouts echoing behind them. They were no longer just running away. They were being hunted. That night, huddled by a small, smokeless fire deep in the wilderness, the truth finally came out. "You're not just a rancher," Catherine said, staring at the man she had run away with. The man who moved like a trained fighter. Blake stared into the flames. "No," he admitted. "Before I came to Montana, I worked for the Pinkerton Detective Agency." The famous detectives, the manhunters. It all clicked into place. The false name, the skills with a gun, his methodical investigation. "My sister Eleanor wrote to me a month before she died," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She was scared. She said Vernon was a monster, but she had no proof. She begged me to help her. I quit the agency and was on my way to get her when I got the telegram saying she had died from a fever. I knew it was a lie." He had come to Willow Creek not as a Pinkerton, but as a brother seeking revenge. He'd taken the job as a ranch hand to get close, to learn Hollister's routines, to find a weakness. "And then I met you," he said, finally looking at her. "And I saw him doing the same thing all over again. I saw him looking at you with the same eyes he must have looked at my sister with. Eyes of a collector choosing a new specimen." He shook his head. "I couldn't let it happen. Vengeance didn't matter anymore. Only saving you did." Catherine looked at this man who had given up everything, his job, his name, his quest for revenge, all to save her, a woman he barely knew. "We can't go to Colorado," she said, the harsh reality setting in. "He'll look for us there. He knows your family is there." Blake nodded grimly. "I know. He'll send men, or he'll send a telegram to a corrupt lawman with a bounty on my head for shooting his men." He raked a hand through his hair. "We're on our own. No law, no allies, just us." And Rose, the loyal maid who had refused to be left behind, who was now a fugitive herself. "There is one place," Blake said slowly, an idea forming in his mind. "It's dangerous, but it's the last place he'd ever think to look for us." He told them about the hole-in-the-wall country in Wyoming, a remote, rugged territory known as a sanctuary for outlaws, a place where the law didn't dare to tread. It was a desperate, crazy plan, to hide among thieves and killers, but it was their only chance. The journey was brutal. They avoided towns, traveling through harsh, unforgiving wilderness. Blake taught Catherine how to shoot, how to track, how to survive. She was a quick learner, the soft edges of her old life burned away by the harsh realities of their new one. The fear was constant, a cold knot in her stomach. Every rider on the horizon, every crack of a twig in the night, could be one of Vernon's hunters. During those long weeks, a bond formed between them, forged in shared danger and whispered conversations by the campfire. She saw the true Blake Richardson, a man of quiet honor, consumed by grief but driven by a fierce, protective instinct. And he saw her, not as a delicate lady, but as a survivor, strong, resilient, brave. One night, sitting under a canopy of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, he looked at her. "I'm sorry, Catherine," he said. "I dragged you into this. Your life is ruined because of me." "No," she said, her voice firm. "You saved my life. Whatever this is, it's better than the life that was waiting for me in that mansion." She hesitated, then found the courage to speak the truth that had been growing in her heart. "I would rather be a fugitive with you than a queen in his prison." He reached out and took her hand. His touch was no longer just comforting. It sent a jolt of electricity through her. In that moment, Surrounded by darkness and danger, something new and fragile and beautiful began to bloom. But their fragile peace was about to be shattered. They were a day's ride from the hole-in-the-wall territory when they were ambushed. It happened fast. A volley of shots from a rocky ridge. One of their pack horses went down. Vernon's men had found them. Blake shoved Catherine and Rose into cover behind a cluster of boulders. "Stay down!" he yelled, returning fire. There were 4 of them, spread out, with the advantage of high ground. They were pinned. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands were steady as she loaded her rifle. She wasn't the same woman who had trembled in the church. She peeked over the rock, sighted one of the gunmen, and fired. The man cried out and dropped his rifle. A look of shocked admiration flashed across Blake's face. "Good shot!" The firefight raged for what felt like an eternity. They were outgunned and out of time. Sooner or later, their luck would run out. Then they heard it. The thunder of hoofbeats. A lot of them, coming fast. "It's Vernon," Rose breathed, her face ashen. "He's brought more men." This was it, the end of the line. Blake looked at Catherine, his face grim. "I'll hold them off. You and Rose run. Take my horse. It's faster." "No," Catherine said, her jaw set. "We're not leaving you." But the riders weren't Vernon's men. A dozen riders swept down into the small canyon, firing not at them, but at the men on the ridge. The ambushers, caught by surprise, were quickly overwhelmed. The leader of the newcomers rode down to their position. He was a tall, older man with a long, graying mustache and a territorial marshal's badge pinned to his coat. "Blake Richardson?" the marshal asked, his eyes sharp. Blake nodded cautiously, his gun still raised. "My name is Marshal Wyatt. We got a telegram from a man named Nash in Willow Creek. Your father-in-law, I believe." Catherine stared at him, stunned. "Her father?" The marshal dismounted. "Seems your father had a crisis of conscience. Walked into the main marshal's office in Helena 2 weeks ago. Confessed to everything. Turns out Hollister was blackmailing him over an old cattle-rustling charge from his youth. Nash decided coming clean was better than letting his daughter get hunted down and killed. Her father, her broken, whiskey-soaked father, had found his courage. He had sacrificed his own freedom to save her. His confession gave us what we needed," the marshal continued. "It corroborated your story. We got a federal warrant for Vernon Hollister, for murder, kidnapping, and corruption. We also arrested Marshal Thornton in Cedar Ridge. Turns out he was on Hollister's payroll for years." He looked up at the ridge where the captured gunmen were being tied up. "These men aren't just hired guns. They're wanted fugitives Hollister hired out of the territorial prison. He promised them pardons from his politician friends." The entire web of corruption was unraveling. "Where is Hollister now?" Blake asked, his voice low and dangerous. The marshal's face hardened. "He slipped through our fingers in Helena, but one of these men said he wasn't running. He was riding south. He's obsessed. He said he was going to your family's ranch in Colorado. He said if he couldn't have your wife, he'd make sure you had nothing left to go home to." A cold dread washed over Blake. His parents, his sisters. They were walking into a trap, completely unaware. Vernon wasn't just after Catherine and Blake anymore. He was going to slaughter Blake's entire family. "We have to get there," Blake said, his voice raw with desperation. "We have to warn them." It was a race against time. Marshal Wyatt and his deputies rode with them, pushing their horses to the breaking point. For days they barely slept, barely ate. All Catherine could think about was the kind, welcoming family that had embraced her, now in the path of a monster. They arrived at the Keller Ranch to a scene of unnatural quiet. There was no smoke from the chimney, no animals in the corral. The front door of the main house hung open, splintered at the frame. They dismounted, guns drawn, hearts in their throats. Inside, the house was ransacked. Furniture was overturned, dishes smashed, but there were no bodies. A frantic search of the property revealed the same thing. The place was deserted. Then they found the note, nailed to the barn door with a hunting knife. Richardson, it read, in Vernon's elegant, spidery script. I have what is yours, your parents, your sisters, their whining children. If you ever want to see them alive again, come to the old silver mine at Devil's Peak. Come alone. Bring your pretty little bride. If I see any badges, they all die. One by one. He had them. He had taken Blake's entire family hostage. It was a trap. Vernon knew he was a ruined man. He didn't want to escape. He wanted a final bloody confrontation. He wanted to destroy everything Blake had ever loved. Marshal Wyatt read the note, his face a grim mask. It's too risky. He'll have the place fortified. He'll see us coming a mile away. I don't have a choice, Blake said, his face pale. It's my family. He wants me too, Catherine said, her voice shaking but firm. This is about me as much as it is about you. I'm going with you. Blake started to protest, but she cut him off. I can shoot. I can fight. You taught me how. I'm not hiding while you walk into his trap alone. We started this together. We finish it together. The marshal saw the determination in their eyes. He came up with a desperate plan. Blake and Catherine would ride in as requested, a distraction. The marshal and his men would circle around the back of the mountain, a dangerous, near impossible climb, hoping to get into the mine from the ventilation shafts above. As they rode toward Devil's Peak, the mountain loomed before them like a jagged black tooth against the sky. The silence between them was thick with fear and unspoken love. Catherine, Blake said finally, if we don't make it out of this, we will, she said, forcing a strength she didn't feel into her voice. But if we don't, he insisted, turning in his saddle to look at her, I need you to know, these last few weeks, running with you, they've been the best days of my life. Tears welled in her eyes. Me too, Blake. He reached across the space between their horses, and she took his hand. When this is over, he promised, we find a piece of land, and we build a life. No more running. I'd like that, she whispered. They reached the entrance to the mine. 2 of Vernon's men were waiting. They took their guns and led them inside, into the suffocating darkness. The main cavern was lit by a dozen lanterns, casting long, dancing shadows. Blake's family was there, tied together, huddled on the cold, damp ground. His mother looked up, her eyes wide with terror. And sitting on a crate of dynamite, a pistol in one hand and a bottle of whiskey in the other, was Vernon Hollister. His fine suit was dirty and torn, his hair was wild, and his eyes burned with a mad, feverish light. The happy couple arrives, he slurred, a broken parody of his old, smooth self. Welcome. I'm so glad you could join our little family gathering. Let them go, Hollister, Blake said, his voice echoing in the cavern. This is between you and me. Oh, it's between all of us now, Vernon sneered. He took a long drink from the bottle. You see, you took something from me. My wife, my reputation, my future. It's only fair that I take everything from you. He gestured with the pistol toward Blake's family. Your past, your present, and your future. He stood up, swaying slightly. But first, the bride. She owes me a wedding night. He lunged for Catherine, grabbing her arm. At that moment, a shout came from the tunnels above. Marshal, drop the weapon! Marshal Wyatt and his men had made it. Vernon spun around, his eyes wild. He fired his pistol up into the darkness. The deputies returned fire. In the confusion, Blake tackled Vernon, sending them both crashing to the ground. The pistol skittered across the rocky floor. Catherine didn't hesitate. While the marshals exchanged fire with Vernon's men, she ran to Blake's family, pulling the small knife from her boot, the one Blake had given her, and frantically began cutting their ropes. Blake and Vernon were locked in a desperate, brutal struggle. Vernon was bigger, but Blake was faster, fueled by righteous fury. They rolled across the floor, their grunts and curses echoing off the stone walls. Vernon managed to get the upper hand, pinning Blake to the ground, his hands closing around Blake's throat. "I should have killed you when I had the chance, farm boy," he spat, his face contorted in a mask of hate. Suddenly, a gunshot roared through the cavern, deafeningly loud. Vernon's body went rigid. The pressure on Blake's throat released. A look of complete surprise crossed Vernon's face. He slid off of Blake, revealing Catherine standing behind him, Blake's pistol held steady in both hands, smoke curling from the barrel. She had grabbed the gun during the struggle. She had shot him. She had saved Blake's life. Silence fell over the mine. Vernon's remaining men surrendered. The family, free from their bonds, rushed to Blake, who was getting to his feet, gasping for air. He looked at Catherine, his eyes filled with awe, and a love so profound it took her breath away. He crossed the space between them and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "It's over," he whispered into her hair. "It's finally over." 6 months later, Catherine stood on the porch of a small, newly built cabin. It wasn't a mansion, but it was sturdy, built by her husband's hands on a beautiful piece of land in a quiet Colorado valley. Their home. A letter had arrived that morning from her brother. Their father had been given a lenient sentence, thanks to his cooperation. He was working on a prison farm and would be released in 2 years. He was sober, and he was, for the first time in a long time, at peace. The rest of Vernon Hollister's network of corruption had been dismantled. Justice, it turned out, could sometimes find its way even into the darkest corners of the West. Blake came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. She leaned back against him, looking out at the mountains that cradled their valley. "I was thinking about choices," she said, "and how one choice, one single moment of courage, can change everything." He rested his chin on her shoulder. "The bravest thing I ever did was ride back to Willow Creek for you." She smiled, turning in his arms to face him. "The bravest thing I ever did," she corrected gently, "was trust you." He lowered his head and kissed her, a kiss filled with the promise of a future they had fought for, bled for, and won together. It was a future built not on wealth or duty, but on a foundation of resilience, courage, and a love that had been tested in fire and had emerged unbreakable. They had faced the monster, and they had won. Their life was just beginning. If you enjoyed this story of survival and redemption, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of the unexpected.